We're researching asbestos and its environmental and health effects.
And now we're going to be going to Cardinal ETC in Novi, and we're just going to meet up with Mr. Robert Smith, who's in charge of the asbestos branch.
So this company does a lot of environmental research. One of their branches, of course, is asbestos, so we'll meet up with him and see what we can find out. So we're here at the Cardinal ATC building.
Okay, my name is Rob Smith. I'm with Cardinal ATC, and we're an environmental engineering consulting company. What that means is basically we deal with the environment, industrial hygiene, which is essentially ensuring that individuals that are in workplaces are in a safe environment.
Okay. The first question is, can you explain what exactly asbestos is and what is it used for?
Okay, so what I did was, for you guys, I put together a little presentation here, and essentially I'll run through it real quick, but asbestos is basically a rock. It's a mineral. It comes out of the earth, it's mined. Over the years, it's been mined in different locations, like in Canada, United States, China is actually still mined. So essentially it's a rock. It can be broken down into 6 different groups, which we can go into next. It comes out of the earth.
Okay.
What it's used for, actually, like if you look around in this room, you know, everything in this room, if this was built back in the early 80s or prior to that, anything in this room is essentially could be asbestos. So the flooring material, the mastics underneath it, the 2x4 ceiling panels, the drywall, the joint compound that's actually applied to drywall, the pipe insulation that's above the ceiling, all of that could be asbestos.
Okay.
So I guess one thing that when we were doing our own research was it was a fire retardant as well, it stopped fires, or it was something like that.
So this is all fireproofing. So spray applied fireproofing is essentially something that's applied to structural steel in buildings, and it increases the fire rating of it. So during construction, there's fire codes that architects and engineers have to essentially adhere to, and asbestos fireproofing actually has a very good fire rating. So it essentially prevents or helps the building burn slower.
Okay.
So like you said before, there's 6 different kinds. So what is its general chemical structure?
Okay, so this next slide here talks about the 6 different types: chrysotile, andesite, chrysotillite, tremolite, actinolite. This display here shows you exactly the different types of asbestos. The one on the far left is the most prevalent. It's used in 95% of all the building products. These are the composition breakdowns. Essentially, it's magnesium silicate.
Okay.
It's a rock, but it's a rock that breaks down into very fine pieces, particles. So small that we can breathe them in and it gets lodged in our lungs.
So again, with the breathing in, what class of toxin does it fall under?
Next slide. Okay, so it is essentially a category 1 or group 1 carcinogen. And you know carcinogen means, right? It's essentially forms cancer in humans. So it's been proven to form cancer, and so it's group 1, category 1. Essentially that's what it is. It's a cancer-causing mineral.
Okay, so your company also does a lot of work outside. So can you explain how asbestos might be introduced into the environment?
I talked with Anthony, and he said you guys one of your projects was with a university right now. So if you can give any information on that.
Right. So what happens is there are 2 main federal regulations that apply to asbestos. It's the EPA and OSHA. The OSHA is concerned about workers and people that are doing work with asbestos, and just people that are in a building. And the EPA is concerned about the actual material itself and where it gets taken to. So one of our roles as an environmental consultant is to ensure that the public, let's say in a school, for instance, is safe during the removal of asbestos, as well as making sure that the company that's hired to remove it knows what they're doing, they do it the right way, and they transport it to a place where it's accepted. Because there's a lot of rules and regulations as far as asbestos and where it gets taken to, how it gets removed, how the people that actually do the work, how they remove it, how they protect themselves to make sure that they have respirators and that they're not breathing in the asbestos fibers. So like currently we're on many different projects where we act as the overseer of the work. So we observe the removal of the asbestos. We make sure they do it the right way, like they keep it wet, they put air machines in the areas where they're doing the work. That air is drawn out, we measure the air to make sure that the exposure to the people does not exceed the OSHA limits.
Okay, and also, since it's so widespread, what are some of its environmental impacts?
Well, let's see, I think that might be, so it's used in all buildings. There are two things. One, it's mined out of the earth, so environmentally, as far as the impact, because it's a rock, it's normal in the environment. Really, where it comes into play is when we disturb it, we take it out of the earth. So the people that are actually disturbing it, they kind of impact it, it impacts their health. Inside of, enclosed spaces like buildings is really where it impacts our environment because, it's been essentially produced for 100 years. So it goes back way much further than that, but for the last 100 years, we've essentially put like 35 million tons of asbestos in all of our buildings, and a lot of it still remains. So whenever we disturb it, whenever we're in older buildings, we disturb this asbestos, it gets into the air, and that's when it causes problems.
Okay. And also, do each one of these have a different effect or anything, or?
Kinda, so this one here is, again, the one that we use the most. That's chrysotile. It's categorized as being flexible. It can be woven into fabrics. If you breathe that in as opposed to the one that's next to it, which is amosite, amosite's probably a little bit worse for you because it's characterized by long needle-like fibers that don't break down as readily. So when you breathe them in, it gets lodged in your lungs, it gets lodged into the air sacs that you essentially have, and it pierces them, damages them, causes scar tissue, and can mutate the cells, which is what causes cancer.
So the structure is really important.
Right, structure is important, yeah.
I guess going along with that also, how is it a threat to our environment?
Again, let's see what I got on the next slide here. I think basically what we talked about before is that it's a threat to human health in the built-up environment, truly. As far as it affecting our environment outside, mining it, there's really not a whole lot of mining activities taking place, at least in the United States. There are active mines throughout the rest of the world, but here in the United States they no longer have active mines. So I would say that essentially in the building workplace areas is where it's really a threat to our health still.
And also, how long is it active in the environment or even in buildings?
So because it's a rock, it doesn't really break down. The reason why they used to call asbestos the miracle product, it really is a great product because it doesn't break down, it doesn't rot, it's cheap. You think of a rock, it doesn't get mold on it, it doesn't, like other building materials. So it really doesn't go away. It's in the environment. Once we mine it and take it out, it stays in the environment. Unless we put it in a landfill, which is really what happens, after all the removal of asbestos in buildings and schools and things like that. When they go in and remove it, it actually has to go and be transported and dumped into a landfill.
Is asbestos a volatile toxin, and can it move from air? Can it move into the air from the soil or water?
No, it's not volatile. So again, you think of just a rock. It's just a rock that breaks down into really small particles. It can get in soil. It's dangerous. It's most dangerous when it's dry. So its enemy is water, because water, if you think about, you ever seen building demolitions that go on, you see these big air misters sometimes. I don't know if you've ever seen a building being demolished, but they pour a lot of water on it, and that's to keep the dust down, and essentially the small fibers that are in the dust so that people don't breathe them in.
Okay.
And also, I know you said it doesn't break down, right? The next question is, how is it broken down? But I'm guessing it doesn't.
It doesn't, no.
Yeah.
Very strong acids could break it down, but yeah, generally speaking, it doesn't break down. That's the reason why it's such a health issue. It's a stone.
Yeah. So are any habitats or species other than humans affected by asbestos, and if so, which ones?
Primarily humans.
Okay.
I mean, other animals could be, I suppose, if they were really exposed to it. Let's say they're around one of the mines that constantly gets torn up. But no, primarily it's humans that are exposed to it because it's through airborne exposure is what we're really concerned about.
Okay. And also, what are some of the symptoms of exposure to asbestos in humans?
So the symptoms, there are many different types of diseases. I don't know if we went through that one or that one before that.
I think it's
Yeah, but
yeah.
essentially there are 3 or 4 main diseases. There's mesothelioma, which you might have heard about on, sometimes in the TV. They still do it late at night. They have these lawyers on there and they talk about mesothelioma. There's asbestosis. There's essentially cancers of the lung. The symptoms can be, the latency period for the symptoms can be a long time. So latency means the time from you actually are exposed until the onset of disease. Sometimes it can be 30 to 40 years before you actually see what's happened. So specifically with asbestosis, that would be a disease where you're exposed to asbestos over a long period of time, every day, day in, day out, for 15, 20 years. Let's say you're one of the guys that works on the Navy shipyards and you're packaging stuff way back when. Asbestosis, that's essentially your breathing gets cut off, you start to, the buildup in your lungs, the scar tissue, eliminates the potential for you to transfer oxygen through your blood. So that's the symptoms is shortness of breath, that kind of thing. No, go ahead.
Would asbestosis be more of an acute or like a chronic condition?
Chronic.
Chronic?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, because it goes for it takes a long time for it to develop. Mesothelioma, on the other hand, which is the cancer of the lining of the pleura, that is very rare. It doesn't occur very often, but it can occur. And there's essentially, with one of your next questions, is there's no dose-response relationship to it, right? So there's no LD50, there's no, that's the reason why it's really a scary disease/issue with asbestos, is because you could be exposed to very little bit of asbestos and still develop mesothelioma. It's very rare, but it can happen.
So there is no like LD50 or like toxic or like lethal dose of it.
No.
What about like its toxicity and under like standardized conditions? It's again like with the LD50, there's nothing at all.
No, the only real dose, I guess the only real regulations out there are like your permissible exposure level for airborne fibers. Like under the OSHA rules, they say that you can be exposed to total fibers over the period of an 8-hour day at a certain level. And if you exceed that level, then you either have to put in engineering controls, so you have to figure out a way to decrease the ability for the asbestos to become airborne, either make it wet, put in ventilation, or you have to put on a respirator, which protects you from, and there's certain respirators that protect more and more and more, right? You go up in levels. So that's really the exposure, the way you limit exposure to it. But yeah, there is no, I mean, you can be exposed again one time and potentially develop a disease.
Okay.
And also its effect, are children more prone to illness compared to like a normal adult? Or the elderly even?
Kind of. I mean, primarily because the latency period issue, right? So if you're a child of 9 years old and you're exposed to it, 30 or 40 years from now, you're going to be 45 or whatever. Whereas if you're 70 years old and you're exposed, maybe there's not an issue because you may not live until you're 110 or 120. Yeah. But and also because of your respiratory system, the way we defend ourselves against asbestos exposure, because children aren't as developed, then that can definitely play a part in susceptibility.
Okay, and then the next question is, are its effects synergistic or antagonistic, and does it react with any other toxins?
It doesn't really react with any other toxins. It is synergistic. So, especially with smoking.
Yeah.
So you've probably done some research on that. So
yeah.
if you smoke cigarettes and you're exposed to asbestos, you have a 90 times more likely chance of developing cancer. And that's essentially because smoking's real bad for you. We do a lot of classes where, abatement workers and other people in the trades business where they smoke cigarettes and then might be exposed to asbestos. And a lot of times they're more concerned about the asbestos and it's really the cigarettes that's going to, cause the problem down the road. But yeah, cigarette smoke essentially damages all of your defenses inside your respiratory system. So that takes away many of your ability to fight it yourself with your body.
And would that also change like your latency period? Would it decrease it or anything?
Sure, it would make it, your potential to develop cancer would be much quicker.
And also, what has the government done in terms of regulations or laws that control asbestos use?
So the Occupational Safety and Health Administration has laws in place to protect workers and protect the public. The EPA has delegated certain requirements in schools to protect children and essentially ensure that it's disposed of properly and that the material is handled the right way from the time you start until it gets disposed of. So the EPA deals with AHERA, which is the Asbestos Hazard Emergency Response Act. So all public schools in the United States essentially have to monitor all of the asbestos that's in the school every 6 months, and every 3 years they have to re-inspect it to make sure that it hasn't changed any condition and make sure it's still in good condition, because the reality of it is when they started talking about when asbestos became such a big issue in the 80s, there was no way you were going to remove it all. I mean, it would cost trillions of dollars to remove it all. So there's just not enough money to do it. So what's the next best step is to manage it in place, figure out how it's dangerous, and that's essentially when you disturb it. So, we have all of these different types of materials. These are like floor tiles that contain asbestos. A lot of the schools have, these floor tiles in them. So they didn't take those floor tiles out. So that's some duct insulation, HVAC insulation, so as long as you manage it in place and the materials are in good condition, it's okay to stay in a school, or it's okay to stay in a building actually. It's just you have to make sure you pay attention to it, you manage it the right way, you have people designated to ensure that it's inspected, especially in schools. That requirement is not in commercial buildings or residential buildings, just in schools.
So as long as you don't disrupt it in any way, it's okay?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, as long as it's not in bad condition and it's not being torn apart, disrupted, it's okay to stay in a building. But it's important to manage it, and it's important to make sure that the people that work around it know what it is, and they know how to treat it, and they know if something does happen that they tell the right person and they take care of it the right way, clean it up, because you don't want to clean it up yourself because you'll just expose yourself.
I know you said before that asbestos it's like a really good material and doesn't break down as easily, but are there any substitutes for it? Or
there's cellulistic type material, there's fiberglass, wool felt materials, fiberglass mostly. That's usually what's been used, or cellulistic material that's woven in, put into the different materials that we have, Again, like all of the materials, the reason why they put it in there is either to insulate it, or make it more durable, or make it more fire resistant.
Okay. And in regards to solutions, like you were talking about managing it, so like what would you say, like what would we do to prevent any exposure, I guess?
More education, essentially awareness of it, so that, right now, like for instance in schools, it's very well documented as far as what to do. Some of the laws are a little ambiguous as far as in commercial buildings or residential properties, where some commercial owners of companies and things like that have big buildings, they may not follow the rules the right way. So a lot of just awareness.
So we just finished our interview with Mr. Robert Smith at Cardinal ATC.
And we gained a lot of information about asbestos and how prevalent it is in our environment, and what a big deal it is. So that was really informative.
Yeah, and he gave us a lot of really good information.